What's up, guys? Welcome, Daily Theologians. We're going to cover a few topics. One, Biden urging Congress at the prayer breakfast to follow Jesus' words to serve rather than to be served. Is this context correct? And then we're going to cover some Christian cliches by Dr. Fresca, BLM at school and how it's indoctrinating children, John Piper. Piper answering why Eve was formed from the rib, and then lastly, the Canadian trucker convoy is not going to let up. We're going to check in on that. So here are a few stories. So number one, Biden urges Congress to follow Jesus' words to serve rather than to be served. Now, in context, this is true, but the rest of the verse is that the Son of Man came not to serve but to be served, or not to be served but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. It was a self-sacrificing love, and I'm curious if Joe Biden is showing that in any way, in any realm, any capacity, when it comes to abortion, when it comes to protecting neighbors, when it comes to honoring the truth by being straightforward and meaning what you say and saying things that are accurate. Of course, none of these things would pass, in my view, Joe Biden's handling of pretty much anything. And the context here is he's saying Jesus taught us to serve rather than be served. Well, the prayer breakfast was, I think, started in the 70s after Billy Graham gave a speech or kind of thing at the Capitol, and then they made it a national day of prayer. And so it's good. It's a good reminder. But and Biden's call for unity, unity around what, though? See, it's hard to have unity without theology. You must have doctrine, key doctrine to drive unity. There can be no unity with lies. There can be no unity with a false view of God and a false view of the Trinity and the gospel. So anyways, the call for unity from Biden and the call to serve, it's proof texting, and it's actually not in the correct frame. Now, yes, we should love our neighbors as ourselves and things like that. But when you see someone who's for the killing of children talk about quoting Jesus, I just instantly think it's totally hypocritical. Next, Christian cliches. John MacArthur. He's been going through a series on this, and this is called a hedge of protection. We pray a hedge of protection around you. Is this biblical? And this has been a blog article series for a little while. And anyways, we want to be very careful with our language. We don't put up a spiritual force field around people. In fact, when I was at a certain company that will remain nameless, they often prayed for a hedge of protection. I know people that have done this. But is this biblical? Is it some sort of like magical incantation? Of course, the answer is not. That is not the case. And we read Job, we see there's a biblical basis for a protective hedge. The Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? And there's no one like him, blameless, upright man, fearing God, turning from evil." Then Satan answered, "Does Job fear God for nothing? You have put a hedge about him, his house, and all that he has on every side. You've blessed the work of his hands." Well, this is what God has done. This is not what people had done. So Satan's accusation was correct. So is this supernatural? The protective hedge is not without biblical precedent. But does it mean believers should pray for such a hedge of protection? I don't think so. I think you should just pray that the Lord would cause our character to be right, to be upright, and to not pray like some invisible force field. And then I do pray for God's protection, but to God, not the word hedge of protection, just to God to protect us. God is a Trinity. He's a person. And so that some people may say this is semantics. Setting aside the excess in science fiction, it's not wrong to recognize God's sovereignty protects his people. This is true. But it's important to grasp the fact from an eternal perspective. It should not escape our attention. God removed his hedge around Job in order to put his faith to the test. Jesus promised his disciples not a hair on their heads would perish, but he preceded that statement by pointing out that the hedge of protection did not apply to his disciples on this side of eternity. They were going to die. They were going to be persecuted and suffer. And so this promise to them was in eternity, primarily. He said, "My sheep hear my voice. I know them. They follow me. I give them eternal life. They will never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand." This is talking about eternal security of the gospel. "My Father's given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of the Father's hand." So it's not wrong to desire God's protection. The Lord has instructed us to pray for deliverance from evil, but we should not object to earthly danger and tribulation as if suffering was outside of God's providential plan. And I think that's the core issue that they're trying to get at on this one. It's perfectly acceptable to refer to God's protection as a hedge, and while the Lord blesses his people and many times shields them from harm, believers must remember ultimate fulfillment of his guarantee is in eternity. Next to BLM. BLM, that lovable group that's under investigation for misusing funds. Who would have thought? I've seen a few mansions that they purchased with these funds. Anyways, they're trying to turn children into radical activists for neo-Marxism or Marxism. And we're smack in the middle of a Black Lives Matters at School Week of Action, which runs Monday, January 31st to February 4th. The Week of Action is promoted by BLM at School, which provides lesson plans and resources across the country. So what are the kids learning? The curriculum is based on the 13 Black Lives Matters guiding principles. This sounds like a confessional creed. Some of these sound good, such as teaching children about empathy or loving engagement with people. Other principles are deeply troubling. The goal is to transform children into radical activists who will disrupt the Western nuclear family dynamics, build women-centered spaces free from sexism, misogyny, and male-centeredness, pursue globalism and diversity. These are all awful ideas. Create a space that is family-friendly and free from patriarchal practices. Now, my question to them, why are those things bad? Why are they wrong? Why is the patriarchy wrong? God created the family. God created the fathers to be help and to rule and lead. Why is that wrong? And then notice they get to the transgender affirming and queer affirming spaces and all of that. It's all connected. Just tear everything down and use whatever tools you can. And it's not hard because humanity naturally runs for sinful things. So it's not hard to get them to take the bait on this and say, yes, let's do this or let's do that. Free ourselves from the bondage of Christianity and God's created world and the way that he's ordered things. So they want to tear it all down. They want to dismantle cisgender privilege. Now, I want to push back on this word cisgender. This is a Johnny-come-lately buzzword that they're trying to stigmify the normal practice of God-created male and female. They're trying to make it weird, like, oh, you have your little label, and it's a bad label, so we have these new labels. It's, I think, an attempt to smear reality, and so don't fall for this term. I would encourage you not to use that term. I think it's a bait term, and it's a way to manipulate reality. It might be a bit much for 5-year-old children, so we want to give students a kid-friendly version. Everybody has the right to choose their own gender. No, they don't. The gender is assigned by God, and it's the way they're created. Gender and biology are not separable. You can't separate them. Everyone gets to choose. No, I'm not even going to read that. So there's a free download. There's this thing. So clearly these schools are hook, line, and sinker for it here. Evanston, Jefferson, Ithaca, Pittsburgh, Windham, Washington State, other places that this is just gonna keep flying. But most liberal places will promote this because it tears down the family, gives them more power. What we're witnessing is a state-sponsored political indoctrination using coloring books, downloadable slideshows, and contests to teach the next generation social justice activism in the program's own words. And she said, we need radicalizations out of schools, especially as children struggle with learning lost from pandemic and reading, writing, and arithmetic back in schools. So this is why I would make the case for homeschooling. Don't send your kids to these places. They're indoctrination centers. And this is a religion of self. This is the Babylonian religion of humanism. Let's exalt ourselves. And Charles Darwin is leading the charge, even if they don't recognize it. This is an antichrist movement. Piper, why Eve was created out of Adam's rib. Now, if you don't know this, God created man and woman, as we just talked about, and the man was made of dust, so Adam of the dust, or of the earth, basically, and Eve was called Eve because she's the mother of the living humans, because you need a man and woman to have children. So obviously God wasn't confused about this. He was going to redeem them eventually through this process of having a human that was fully man and fully God, Jesus Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One. But Eve was formed out of the rib, and she was formed as a helper. And this is so offensive to so many people that God would create people with different roles. But there's nothing wrong with this. It doesn't mean she's less human. It doesn't mean she's less valuable. It means that she has a different role, and she is a helper. It's a good creation. Man and woman are both created in the image of God, bone of my bones. So two become one, just as one became two become one in marriage. And then you have children, and the children produce godly offspring. And thus, the covenant of marriage is to point us to Christ and his church. The covenant of redemption is somewhat paralleled in the covenant of marriage. So we see this here. And so God used Adam's rib to form Eve. The website states to show Adam and Eve were of the same substance, made from the same stuff, a bearer of God's image, just like Adam. Interestingly, ribs have amazing regenerative powers. Portions of rib bones and cartilage removed in bone graft surgery will regrow in a few months' time. That's interesting. Anyways, Adam's loss of rib was only temporary. and he had a rib back. I've always wondered about that, actually. That's interesting. So Piper basically says she's a suitable helper. She fits, she corresponds. She's not an animal. She's unique. She's human. She's one with me, basically created for Adam and good. And for all of humanity. It's a blessing to all of humanity that Adam and Eve are human, because that's how you get a human Messiah that's fully God and fully man. You need that. It's part of redemption. Lastly, on to the Canadian truckers. They're calling this the Great Honkening, or basically awakening, but honkening in Canada. And basically, this is not a radical movement. This is a movement based on reality and freedom. And so anyways, let's see what this guy has to say.
We're not anti-vax. We're not anti-anything other than anti-mandate.
Give people their freedom back. Give people their lives back. Give people their choices back.
Until we get the confidence that our government has heard us, we're not leaving. We're not going anywhere.
Wow, this is an amazing...
Not going nowhere, he says. So it'll be interesting. I mean, they're not going to be able to function without those truckers. It's going to be very difficult.
New visitor.
It's going to be very difficult for them to continue on without having truckers, supply chain. It's going to make it very difficult. So these guys are not, they're not crazy. They're not radical. They're just hardworking people that want the ability to live their lives and to be able to gather and to be able to go to church and to be able to be not arrested for eating in public and going places and not getting things that they may disagree with. Now, I'm not saying they shouldn't get the thing. That's, I mean, totally up to them. There's a lot of confusion around the whole thing. But the point is this. They just want their lives back. And the point of freedom, true freedom, though, is found in Jesus. All of these things, all of this oppression, all of this evil, it's demonic. It comes from Satan. These are not unattached things. Look at, I mean, Biden's talking about it here. Rather serve than be served. Well, Jesus came to give his life as a ransom, to buy people back, to redeem them, to pay the debt, basically. We owe an infinite hell debt to a holy, perfect God, and unless you repent, you will perish. You will face God's righteous judgment in a very serious, very real place called hell. You must turn from self and sin and put all of your faith in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus to forgive you and to save you. And you must remember to hammer that like button, like the 95 Theses, and leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much, and God bless.